Hello and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world today. Welcome to today's episode of Experience Exchange. I'm Tom Lewis from TTEC Digital, and I am thrilled to have Erica Ong with us today, who is the head of productivity in the public sector with AWS. And so she's got a ton of experience, and we're going to talk about my favorite topics around customer experience and increase revenue, drive customer loyalty, and all those fun things. But today's topic is really going to revolve around data analytics and how that is a superpower for supervisors. So, Erica, welcome to the Experience Exchange today.
Thanks so much for having me, Tom.
I appreciate the opportunity, and in particular, I know AWS has a lot to say about this topic, but so just as a level set a little bit, when I talk about data analytics and the idea that it has an influence on the supervisor, my head goes in a lot of different places, because on the one hand, data analytics can be a difficult topic. On the other hand, so there's lots of dimensions to it. But on the other hand, it does have this sort of outsized impact. So give me an overview from your perspective of how analytics plays a role in that supervisor supervisor responsibilities.
Well, gosh, how doesn't it play a role? As guess is where I'd start. I often think or start, if you will, from what are the largest challenges of a supervisor in the contact center, and I have the honor of working for AWS now, which obviously Amazon.com is known for its customer experience, but I've also had the honor of running and operating contact center and customer experience solutions in the past. So I've been directly responsible for teams of supervisors who were challenged with feeling disconnected from their teams, having to spend too much time behind a computer, pulling data, trying to analyze the data, and not enough time coaching, developing, and leading their teams. So data and analytics, to me, in terms of the role of the supervisor experience, really hinges on shifting away from being reactive with limited information and becoming proactive and allowing those supervisors to really be freed up and armed with actionable data, actionable insights to coach, guide, and develop their teams.
So that's an evolution, clearly, because you described the historical state where they're spending a lot of time in spreadsheets and workforce management and all these kind of things. And if my job is to do two things: one, help deliver exceptional customer experience, as well as to motivate and lead my team, sounds like I'm not getting a lot of intersection or a lot of time to do that. Whereas today, I have more insights around that and more, sort of more opportunities to have those exchanges. But on the other hand, I bet some of those supervisors grew up in the former world as an agent or as a supervisor and never learned those skills. So let me sort of take you off track for a second and talk about the human experience and try to help me understand how are supervisors and agents adapting to that new world.
I think they're adapting well, in a sense of, you're right, a large segment of, I would say, the supervisor population likely was promoted from the agent population. Typically, it's common for you to take your top performing agents and they get promoted to being a supervisor. But just because you're a great agent doesn't mean that you're equipped with the coaching skills and the development skills to share that knowledge and form the next generation, if you will, the next team of high performing agents. And that's where proactive reporting and things that effectively make the supervisor's job easier to do helps with not only the development of agents, but the development of supervisors as well. And I would say those two roles are critical then to providing a optimal and improved end customer experience.
Got it. Well, so now let me shift back to the technology again for a second and talk about, is there, I don't know, if you had to force rank the things that are most impactful in terms of what the technology is bringing, I'm going to get really, talking about the capability of technology in terms of analytics in this. What's the number one, maybe number two thing that technology brings to bear to those supervisors?
So I would say off the top of my head, and it's kind of interesting to think that, old school, quote unquote, old school now is only a matter of maybe a couple years ago. Right. But is our ability to go from monitoring, might be familiar with quality monitoring or performance evaluations of calls and the agent's performance on those calls, traditionally was a very manual process. And I would say it's common even today for it to be a manual process done by supervisors, done by dedicated quality agents, of literally just listening to a very small subset of recorded calls. Maybe 1% of calls, maybe 2% if you're lucky. Not sure it's ever something that's statistically accurate. Right. And now, thanks to AI, we can, and technology, we can monitor 100% of all calls. And that changes the dynamic so completely between the relationship between the supervisor and the agent. Because if you get back to that human experience part of it and that human relationship part, and I'm so happy you started with that because that's what's key critical, is it goes from, think about an agent in a coaching situation with a supervisor. And a common thing would be, oh, supervisor, you listened to my one bad call. You can't judge me for the one bad call. I had an off day. And that happens. It's totally true.
It's legit, right?
And Mr. and Mrs. Supervisor, that was subjective. It's just your judgment. It's your opinion. Now we can take those, subjective concerns and remove them from the table completely, remove them from the conversation, and arm both the supervisor and the agent with data on 100% of the performance of the agent. And now, instead of the supervisor and agent being maybe on opposite sides of the table, it allows them to actually join forces and say, okay, here's the data we're looking at. Here's your performance over the past week or whatever the time period was. And now here are the areas that you did a great job on. And here's maybe opportunities for improvement. And beyond just a smattering of opportunities for improvement, you can actually develop your own Pareto chart, if you will, and stack rank those things for, we're not going to boil the ocean, right? So if you're an agent, I want you to really focus on this one thing for the next week, right? And it goes from an adversarial relationship to one of partnership and coaching and support.
So fantastic. I'm going to tell you a quick story, and then I'm going to ask you a question about it. So I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here. But I've been telling this story for 20 plus years. And it's around this idea of what I refer to as my 10-pound bag of goo. So imagine you have a 10-pound bag of goo, and it's meant to represent the contact center. Okay. So it's an unstable mass. And in order to keep it in equilibrium, you put straps around it. One of the straps is average handle time. Another strap might be customer satisfaction. Another one might be first contact resolution. Whatever your metrics are around those things, those are the straps. So because we're talking about human behavior, if I constrict the average handle time, which I think most organizations recognize is not quite the right way to manage things anymore, but that nonetheless, if I do that, then goo is going to fall out of the bag unless I loosen my expectations around customer satisfaction, as an example. Okay. So as soon as you get it into equilibrium, because there's humans in there, then the humans figure out like, well, you just listened to my bad call, or you just did this, or I manipulated, things like that. And so it creates an environment that means that you're constantly adjusting the metrics to try to perfect the team that you have and the metrics that you're controlling. Now, let me pivot into, so that's my story around how a contact center is like a 10-pound bag of goo. The question though is, with what you just answered in the prior question, the ability to have what I'll call a more perfect view into what the agents are doing seems to be a true thing. And the idea that the stability of this 10-pound bag of goo, or the contact center, I mean that in the most loving way possible, is easier to contain, and that there's less variability around it. Now, that's my hypothesis. Please shoot it down or validate, or sort of opine on that based on that story you've never heard.
Well, thanks. First, I'm going to try to ward off the PTSD I now have, because I felt like I was getting some sort of SAT math question that I wasn't able to solve with that.
All good.
But I'll put that aside for now. Yeah. I think, and I actually love the analogy. I've used one in a similar sense in the past, of like it being a balloon, right? And you push down on one side of a balloon, and maybe that's handle time, right? Tell me if I'm tracking and we're saying the same thing, but that's going to make something else bulge out somewhere else, right? And I think now, with being able to truly analyze, like you said, a holistic data set, and beyond, I guess I'll say, recording the data, you can actually do that analysis, right? We can do call summarizations. We can do a summarization of a whole, sampling of calls, if you will.
Yep.
That actually means to me that average handle time, first call resolution, and CSAT, to name a few of those key typical KPIs in contact center management, are no longer, again, opposing forces, but ones that can work together in harmony. Because I would argue that when an agent is equipped to resolve the customer's issue on the first time and in the most efficient manner, then that is going to both improve first call resolution, improve customer satisfaction, and reduce handle time. And so that's where I think those KPIs will be able today to work in harmony, as opposed to, again, I have to do some sort of trade-off where I think it's a falsehood that longer handle time leads to improved customer satisfaction.
So let me shift gears on you a little bit, Erica, if you don't mind. So we were talking a lot about, we started the conversation with data analytics, but we're also emphasizing customer experience as deployed through the agent and the supervisor. But when you think about the capabilities of data analytics and harvesting what's going on in the contact center, can you talk a little bit about other use cases for it, in terms of the problems or the pain that you see in the contact center that customers are really trying to solve and use that technology to enable?
Yeah, I think forecasting, scheduling, capacity planning is another key one, right? We know this has been an evolving space for some time. I'll probably both date and tag myself as super dorky from a workforce management perspective, but running, Erlang C algorithms to try to forecast call volumes, handle time, and then associated staffing needs around that. So there's a lot more we can do now with AI and ML in terms of predictive analytics in forecasting, capacity planning, and scheduling. Not only does that help with the very tactical needs of creating schedules for agents and correspondingly supervisors, this actually helps because, again, I would argue that the biggest retention factor for agents is having that positive collaborative relationship with their supervisor. Now, we just talked a lot about what that means to develop and coach agents. Well, let's get even more kind of rudimentary than that. The supervisor needs to work at the same time that their agents work, right? So how do we schedule through teams where the supervisor is there and the teams are all there working a similar shift? How do you have the analytics to do that and do it in an optimized manner so that you're also there when you expect the contacts to be coming in and you're actually there for your customer? So the more we can do that, improve that, and also improve the schedules of our agents so they get the proper break times and coaching times and meal times, those are all critical to creating that positive employee experience, both at the supervisor and the agent level.
So I can imagine that if you're talking to a buyer, and by buyer, I mean your end client who owns the contact center, you're trying to, you're telling this story, and the people that are responsible for the operations are like, heck yes, we need to do more of this, and this is great, and why have we been doing it the old way all this time? So, but I imagine that this stuff doesn't necessarily, as I like to say, fall off the truck on its own. And so when you're having a conversation with a client who has not adopted this, is not intimate with all the capabilities you're talking about, what are some of the constraints that they have in sort of getting their mind there, and or what's the pain that they start with in terms of trying to use AWS as a solution in the mix of all of this? And while I'm not really talking about AWS necessarily, any technology in this realm, and certainly have a front row seat to how you all do it.
Yeah. I can speak obviously more firsthand from how we do it, but I can also certainly speak just in terms of where I see the industry going as well.
Please.
And I kind of see it as a little bit of two polar opposites of two ends of the spectrum when you're talking specifically about forecasting, capacity planning, scheduling, or you might call it workforce management as well. You have maybe the have-nots from a technology perspective that are still doing it in a very brute force, Excel spreadsheet driven manner that, I've never had a customer argue that their Excel spreadsheet, system is better than using, analytics and AI and ML to forecast their call volumes and generate schedules as a result.
Even though they try to convince you that they're unique and they only can do it one way, but yes.
Fair, but even with that, normally the biggest hurdle, which you kind of alluded to in your question, is just, well, how do I even get started, right? I don't even know where to begin. And that's also where technology now can help so seamlessly, because as long as, if you're net new to the technology, as long as we have historical call volume data, we can ingest all of that in and just go ahead, literally with the flip of a switch, go ahead and showcase our predictive analytics for call volume forecasting, but also associated schedules based on the parameters you have of hours of operation, the number of agents you have, all those sorts of things. Then I would say on the total opposite end of the spectrum, you have customers that maybe have a lot of technical debt in something that has been potentially working, maybe not for them, but it's very expensive. It's a big burden to manage. It's typically a third-party solution that's connected via API into a different contact center platform. And there's a lot of oversight and overhead and also brute force required to make sure that the two systems talk and are merged together and they're working in harmony, if you will. And what we're seeing now is, instead of having, and trust me, I have my war wounds, if you will, for managing these types of solutions in the past that I kind of call Frankenstein contact center solutions, where you have all this disparate technology that's held together with, duct tape and brute force. And how can we provide one packaged application that has native capabilities for what's needed, whether it's performance evaluations, whether it's forecasting, capacity planning, and scheduling, and all of the native AI, ML, and now today generative AI analytics, so that, again, it's freeing up your time to really focus on what matters most, which are your end customers and your employees, as opposed to just managing the technology that holds all of that together.
Sure, sure. Okay, so I got one more question for you. This has been illuminating, but and I'll give you an option A or an option B on the which question you answer. So when you're talking to somebody and sort of getting up to speed on how these capabilities can work for them, what is the one question that you wish they did ask or didn't ask you during that conversation?
Did ask or didn't ask? Gosh, I might flip that a little bit, and I'm going to go rogue, and I'm going to go with my own option C, I guess.
Okay, that's fine. There's no rules here.
Which I really like to take a big step back with customers, and let me maybe paint the picture a little bit for you. Typically, I'll have conversations with prospective buyers, with customers, and they come in maybe thinking they know what they want, if you will. It's a very like tactical conversation of, I need new workforce management software, or I need a call recording solution or something like that. And before I ever start to make a suggestion of what might work for them, I actually want to ask a question of them, which is, what are you trying to solve for? What are you trying to do? What are the outcomes you're trying to drive? And what is the biggest pain point for you in your business right now? A very recent example was, again, I'm actually surprised we haven't talked too much about generative AI yet in this conversation. It's obviously, the biggest kind of buzz term that's out there right now. And we're, I'd say living at this super exciting but disruptive time of actually adopting generative AI and what are the right use cases. But I would argue that sometimes, generative AI is not needed for what customers are trying to do. It might be trying to, I use the analogy of trying to, nail in a thumbtack with a sledgehammer. And if that's not needed, maybe sometimes just your traditional AI and ML will work out just fine, or some traditional mechanisms that are built in to our software application, right? So that's why I think it really starts with, what business objectives are you trying to solve for? And then work backwards from that, because we are living at this time where technology can almost do anything. Mm-hmm. And technology just ends up being the enabler for process changes that affect people. And that's what you always have to stay laser focused on, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple of points that I tend to find with customers and prospects and so forth. One of which is the idea that the right technology for the right job, which was sort of your later point around it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's good. And the other, earlier in your answer, was around understanding not that they need workforce management, but rather understanding what the pain is or the problem they're trying to solve. Exactly. And so, that's less, when we're having conversations with clients, I like to understand the problem they're trying to solve, as opposed to, somebody calling me up, say, can you bring a screwdriver over? It's like, well, yeah, but what for? Well, I need to dig a hole in the backyard. And it's like, well, let's talk about the hole first, and then we'll worry about the tools that we use for that. So Erica, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you. Obviously, if people have questions, they can connect with you through the LinkedIn here. They can connect with anybody at TTEC who wants to put those two stories together. The AWS story and the TTEC Digital story is a powerful one in the market, and we'd love to continue this discussion with those that are listening today. So with that, Erica, have a fantastic rest of your day, and thank you, everybody, for listening in.